Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, everybody. It's Kate with Memories Made of Music. And here I am today with the great, the awesome, the wonderful composer, orchestrator, conductor, Taylor Scott Davis. How you doing today, Taylor?
I'm so good, Kate.
Today we're going to talk about your newest album, celebrating music, your writing process, getting people into the symphony, orchestra music, and choral music. And I'm hoping the very cool topic of synesthesia, which I have been wanting to talk about for so long. Can you tell us the difference between being a composer, an orchestrator, and a conductor? Can you describe what some of those things mean?
So, a composer is somebody that's writing melodies, underpinned by chord structure or phrasing, all sorts of stuff. Um, an orchestrator is not necessarily coming up with that as much as they are assigning different instruments to the sound. So, I could very easily orchestrate somebody else's melody, and that would be the line of demarcation, orchestration versus composition. Um, for the album, I am the composer and the orchestrator for most of it. So I wrote these melodies and then I assigned these instruments to be a part of it. And then a conductor could potentially have nothing to do with either of those things. They're the person on the podium that's convincing the members of the orchestra or the choir to follow their tempo, to move at their pace, to sort of bring different passages to life. So all three of those things are independent, and sometimes they are the same person. Bernstein is a great example of somebody who could come up with melodies, he could orchestrate those melodies, and then he'd be on the podium bringing those things to life with an orchestra.
So, are you ever the conductor, the guy that's waving around the the
I
stick, for
am.
a better word?
I am. I love conducting. I don't know that I prefer to conduct my own stuff. I mean, I do very much enjoy it. And also, I think part of the point of art is that people are to interpret it. And that is, of course, listeners using their ears, but that's also potentially a conductor saying, when I see these notes on the page, when I hear the orchestra playing behind it or the choir singing behind it, I want to highlight, X, Y, and Z. And that might be a 45-degree pivot from what I was thinking. So I just think it's crucial to have interpretation as a part of what I do. So I very much enjoy watching other people conduct as well.
I love that because I often find that collaboration really brings things to, I mean, it could go well, it could not go well, but you're always going to get a different spin on it when you add other people into the mix. So if you had, for example, imagined your pieces being at a certain tempo, do they have the liberty to change the tempo? Or
Yeah.
they're going to say, on this part, I really want to bring out the horn section and have that be
Yeah.
louder at
Yeah.
certain sections. That's
Yeah.
cool.
It's entirely at that person's discretion. They could completely disagree with me. They could partially agree with me and say, all right, you put 72 beats a minute, but I kind of see this as being, 88 beats a minute or something. And that sounds maybe insignificant, but it's a departure from what I've put on the music as sort of the way to navigate the music. And yeah, it's entirely up to somebody else saying, I like this, and here's how I perceive it to be its best self. And some of that it can be governed by the forces. Maybe the orchestra has a really strong string section, but the brass section isn't as good, and so tempo might be changed based on which section is thriving and which section needs a little bit of help. Could be also governed by the room, how much reverb there is. Are you in a super dry space? Or are you in a very reverberant space? So lots of things go into it beyond just here's how I'm interpreting it. But I do think it's very cool that people look at something and say, I like this. I think we could make it our own if, whatever.
I love that. That's just something I never thought of, that one would have to account for the room acoustics and certain things that they're going to bring out in the moment, and also the strength of, maybe not the ability of the players, but I mean, always want to play to your strong point. So I've never thought of that before, that somebody would need to accommodate for the differences, like in the certain people that they're working with in the room. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Personnel can make a big difference for sure.
Well, let's back up for a minute, because I just want to know, how does one start with this journey? Like, how did you start on your journey to becoming a composer? Can you tell us your current role, full journey, and anything that you've had to overcome along the way?
So my dad is a musician, and I, by virtue of my proximity to him in being raised and then, watching professional to professional what he did, I just enjoyed this very, like courtside seat basically to how stuff worked. And I think that played a massive role, of course. I just grew up very immersed in music, and everything belonged. There was no right genre or wrong genre. Um, Music was music. It was just a big old playground. So I took piano lessons from a very early age, and I always found myself thinking or like overthinking while playing. I'd be in the middle of learning a piece, and then along the way, I'd think, well, why did they do this when they could have done that? And then start to sort of make it my own. And then a teacher would have to say, Mr. Schubert wasn't really interested in your opinion. Um, so
That's funny.
I, took piano lessons. I sang in choirs. I played the French horn through high school, and then went to music school in college and studied, um, with even greater detail there. And then got out in the world and started making a place for myself. As far as writing is concerned, I always had melodies in my head, and I just thought everybody did, because you don't know to ask other people questions when you think that everything is normal, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it just is what it is. And so I didn't know to walk around and say, as a 5-year-old, hey, do you listen to this melody and enjoy it in your head? That just it never dawned on me that people didn't have melodies in their heads. So from a very early age, I loved writing. I loved um, like sitting at the piano and making things up or improvising. Um, and then eventually those things were written down, and eventually those things that were written down were submitted for publication. And, you know, 40 plus years later, here we are.
Oh man, I have so many questions, because I love how you talk about the foundation of you starting to be interested was really your family.
Mhm.
I mean, you had a good example of other people doing that. And I think sometimes, especially that happened to me too, that you may not know, if you're sitting around and kids are watching you, just from the fact that they are seeing you play guitar or doing something that involves music. It doesn't really take, you know, as much verbally sort of instruction. Like, you are a living example of what somebody can do if they can just see you doing it.
Yeah. I, I was sort of in an apprenticeship program without it ever being referred to as my dad didn't say, and this is my apprentice son, Taylor. I was just sort of the loitering unpaid intern because I was 12 years old and lived in his house. But I just ended up availing myself to singing in every group I could, or if he needed me to play something or help run a rehearsal or whatever, I jumped in. But it was all proximity. I learned at the feet of somebody that was very good at what they did, and here I am.
So did he do exactly the type of work that you're doing now?
Not necessarily exactly. So he is at a large Methodist church in Houston. I'm at a large Methodist church in North Dallas area called Plano. He has written some music. I have written a lot of music. But he also started accompanying people at a very, very high level when he was a young man. And that was never of interest to me. I was never interested in being an accompanist. Um, I found more pleasure in being on a podium and running a rehearsal and like ironing things out than I think he did when he was younger. And he enjoyed sitting at a piano and helping a soloist bring something to life, or sitting at a piano and playing for a choir or whatever. So there are these little varying differences between us, but by and large, it's a little bit like Control C, Control V, just a copy paste kind of thing.
Okay, so as an accompanist, you mean that he was a pianist. He played piano along with people and
Right.
worked
Right.
with them.
So, there are pianists that would be considered concert pianists, and there that exists as a sort of on an island. Like they would play for like with orchestras or on their own, or perhaps other instrumentalists, but it's not really considered accompanying. Accompanying is its own craft, its own art form, and there are people who are absolutely brilliant pianists, but they think that their offering, their gift, their art is helping coach a singer or play for a choir or an ensemble. Um, Maybe they're playing on Broadway in a pit, but there are concert pianists who would never want to play in a pit or for a choir rehearsal. So it's these parallel tracks, and you can be exceptional at both. It's just that one is a bit more performance oriented, and the other one is a bit more guided by who you're collaborating with.
See, I love what you're saying here because I feel like if somebody was going to go on a journey like this, I mean, my first thought would be unless you're like exposed to it at an earlier age or some people that do this type of stuff, you wouldn't really know the different directions that you could take things in.
Yeah.
Like how, and I mean, I guess I like to kind of focus on the actual mechanics of it. When you say you submitted things for publication, for example, how does anybody, like, say that there's anybody that has something right now, like how does somebody even learn about how to do this or go about submitting things or where or
It is sort of insidery language. I've over the course of my lifetime, whether it was when I was a kid or now as an adult with friends that have kids, if somebody's excelling in, say, baseball or volleyball or something, they'll be put on a club team. And these club teams, if you're 12, 14, 16, 18, whatever, they compete against one another across the country. And if that sounds expensive, it should, because it is expensive. And so it's like the starting point isn't even necessarily knowing um, about club teams or how to participate in sports like that. The starting point really is, can you afford, as a parent, to take time away from your job to drive to Florida to be a part of a tournament? It's a very, very expensive proposition. And that's before you ever get to college. And that's also, there's no guarantee that the return on investment by virtue of the kid becoming a professional volleyball player or baseball player will happen. So I'm saying all of that to say music is very much the same thing. It's like you have to get into private lessons if you're going to study piano, which means you have to be able to pay somebody, or you have to have an instrument at home in order to practice. It's all very insidery if we're not careful. Um, as far as submitting music is concerned, remember I said my dad has a few things in print, and I was just able to say to him, all right, I've written this thing. Now tell me what the next part of this is so that it has life, beyond just me putting notes on paper. And so he helped guide that process early on. But if anybody that's watching your channel has this wild hair idea that they might like to write something, then you go to publishers' websites, and publishers are, perhaps specializing in different things. So, like, if one of your viewers wanted to write choir music, then they would go to a publisher that publishes choir music, not just any publisher ever anywhere. Or if they were perhaps into band music, they would find a publisher that excelled at selling band music, and you submit now through their website. So you go to their website, and it'll say something about submissions or new compositions or something like that. And as a part of that, then you upload a PDF of your music or what have you. But back in the day, it was like you folded it up, put it in an envelope, sent it off. It arrived when it arrived. They would take a look at it. They would decide whether or not it fit their catalog. Could be 6 months later, you would hear yay or nay. And if you heard that they wanted it, then it was theirs. And if they didn't want it, then you could send it potentially to somebody else. So it's just this, you kind of have to know which rocks to turn over. And then once you kind of figure that out, it's a bit self-guided. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I was just, laughing as you were saying about how everything used to be on paper by carrier pigeon, and it
Yeah.
had to go off and, 6 months later to somebody, like it or not, through paper mail. But yeah, like, so, okay, I mean, you had a path to kind of know how to do this, but if somebody wanted to do things like this today, they would search out certain publishers that publish specific things.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah, so I guess the next thought that I'm having, where my mind is going with this, is that physically writing notation, like sheet music, is that something that you learned as a child? Did you learn that in college? Do you sit there? In my mind, I'm imagining like that movie Amadeus, where Mozart is like leaning over the pool table and he's like drinking and writing with a
Yeah.
quill pen. Or have you ever, or do you use, because I know there's a lot of computer software these days where you can play MIDI, and you can have it actually write the sheet music of your MIDI through the software. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah. Um, I will either write at a piano or I'll write at a computer. And I I I think in general I come up with an idea and then I sit down and put it in, to the computer. But sometimes I'll start with a fragment of an idea, and then by sitting at a piano or computer, I begin to kind of, hang some meat on it, so to speak, and it grows into the thing that it was meant to become. Um, I I think the idea of sitting, there's this romantic idea of sitting with a quill and a piece of paper, and in general, I think you have to learn how to do that stuff. Like, you have to learn to crawl before you walk. I think you need to know how to write stuff down on paper. But at this point in my career, I do know how to do that. I can do that. but writing at the computer makes me much faster. And it's important at this point for me to be able to really sort of drive at freeway speeds and not crawl along. Um, it just increases my workflow.
Okay. But yeah, so you have done that and you can do that where you sit, and I know it is sort of a romantic thought in a way that you're sitting and writing the what key it's going to be in, and then exactly what the melody is going to be. That's cool. But I mean, people could do that though these days. They could learn. I know there's a piece of soft Logic Pro has that. I think it's called the score editor. I don't kid. What kind of software do you use? Can you say?
So my primary notation software is Finale, and I'm going to say that. And anybody that's watching this that is under the age of 40 is laughing at me right now, and anybody that's over the age of 40 is like, yeah, I get it. That guy grew up in a time when Finale was the thing, and so that's what I learned. You know, it was for a time. It was the industry standard to learn the program Finale, but just I think it was last year it went under and it is no longer supported. So now I have this dinosaur of a program. Every time I open it, I think, is this going to be the last time it agrees to open and I make music, or do I need to move on? So my program is Finale. And a second ago, you said something about MIDI. And while I do use MIDI to create sounds, to mock up sounds, I don't use MIDI to create notation. Um, a, I don't think I know how to do that, and it saved me any time at all. I think it would take twice the amount of time. And B, I've gotten into this rhythm, this workflow that works for me, and I'm just not interested in changing that. Now I really do sound like a dinosaur myself, but it because I know what works and because I know the beginning, middle, and end of my process, then I don't see a reason to tweak it. So I've never really done the whole MIDI as notation, but I know plenty of people that do.
Yeah, and just to briefly, for people who don't know what MIDI is at all, it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And it's basically using some sort of controller to input information into your computer that can then be interpreted as musical notes, sounds, or whatever you assign to it. And then that can translate into your sheet music. But so you're saying the way that you do it is you're taking some sort of acoustic energy. Like, are you recording piano like with a microphone and then it translates into the sheet music?
No, so I using my keyboard on my laptop or the keyboard on my desktop. I'm gesturing like you can see it over there. Um, I I input notes on a staff using the number key. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those all equal certain note values. So in Finale, 5 is a quarter note, 4 is an eighth note, 6 is a half note. And so I move the cursor up and down and I put those notes where they're supposed to go. Um, and then if I'm using MIDI, I'll use it to create a recording that I can send a client. So if somebody has commissioned me to write something and I want them to hear kind of my progress or what I'm thinking, if I'm trying to kind of idea board more or less, I'll come up with some like I'll write the music out on my computer and then I'll play it into these MIDI programs, and it just makes it sound. I can make it sound like a choir, I can make it sound like an orchestra, what have you. Um, but I don't use it like I don't use a microphone and I don't use MIDI to create notation.
Okay, I see. I don't know anything about Finale, but that's fascinating that you can. So you're just pressing the numbers and you're choosing what the you want the notes to be, and then you're using the computer to place them on the staff, which is it's just the same thing really as sitting there with a quill
Yeah,
pen in a lot of ways, except that you're like actually just using a computer to place it where you want it.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get it. That's really interesting. I can imagine somebody sitting there doing that.
It probably sounds antiquated in many ways. And I'm sure my version that I just told you, where I write something out and then I play it, I'm sure I'm taking in some ways twice as long to do that. But I know and trust that method. And so I just stick with it. But there's really no wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes, it's like if you already know how to do something, you're going to be twice as fast at it just from the sheer, practice of
Yeah.
having done it so many
Yeah. The
times.
repetition for sure.
But so when you like if because the way that like say I would write something if I was writing my own music, like I'll go and hum things and record it, and then I'll hear another part and I'll hum the other part, and I record it into Pro Tools and it layers up like that, and then I can hear the whole piece. But if you're just entering notes like that and you're hearing it in your head, I guess that's the part that's always fascinating me, because the way it comes out in me is I'm either singing it or I'm playing it on guitar. But you're putting notes, for like lack of a better way to say it, like straight from your brain without ever hearing it like on an external instrument?
Yeah, potentially. Uh,
That's awesome.
if it, here's my litmus test. If I can play something two or three times at the piano and it be more or less the exact same each time, I'll say to myself, all right, there's your idea. Go with that. If I can't play it two or three times in a row, that's my signal that I don't yet have the idea out from here in a way that I can write it down. So I have to be able to repeat it to myself. And in that repetition, then I do it a couple of times and I'm able to write it down for somebody else to sit down and do it, you know. But I have to pass, that's the first, maybe not the first hurdle, but that's the main hurdle, is being able to do it multiple times in the same way so that it it feels kind of locked in, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So let's go back to instruments in general, because I know you said you played French horn, and I played French horn for a time too. How many instruments do you play? Do you still play them for enjoyment, or like what's your main instrument? Is it piano?
Yeah. So I studied a lot of voice for my degree, and so I don't have a any kind of piano degree. But the piano is my that's like my therapy. And if I'm out of sorts, as a human, not just as a musician, but if I just don't feel like myself, um, I one of the first questions I ask, well, A, am I hangry? You know, like, am I having a blood sugar issue? But then
Right.
B, when was the last time I sat and created at the piano? Even if creation is like for no reason other than just sitting down and noodling. So that's that's my go-to. That's my happy place. And then anything that looks like a piano, I can generally pick up pretty quickly. You know, an organ behaves like a piano in so many ways. The accordion, half of it behaves like a piano. So I can pretty easily sit and spend loads of time on anything that has piano looking keys. The French one I haven't picked up in ages. I was probably 17 the last time I played, so it's been a while. I think I probably could still make some notes sound, but I'm not going to be auditioning for anything.
Okay. So the guitar, do you play guitar?
I can play a few chords. I'm not, like I if you listen to me play like four or five chords, you'd think, oh, that guy kind of knows what he's doing. Nope, I just showed you my entire repertoire. So that's that's pretty much it. Um, I know how it works. I understand, open tuning, drop tuning, stuff like that. But I don't. I gave up on that a long time ago.
Yeah, and that brings me to the thought, if a person is going to be an orchestrator slash conductor, do they have to know how to play every instrument?
No.
So then how would one be able to write for instruments that are like all different tunings and everything?
So when I was in college, I said to my dad, again, my dad does what I do. He's a very good musician. I said, if I had a book that had all of the ranges of an instrument or of orchestral instruments, I think I could get started. I think I could like put something together. But from where I was when I made that ask, 18 or 19, I just simply didn't know the lowest note of a cello or the highest note of a flute or anything. And so that year for Christmas, I got a little book. I still have it. It's a pretty rudimentary book, but it's every basic fundamental understanding that I need to to create. So I got that book and just kind of dug in. So like I get I get the book that talks about ranges and textures and if a violin is playing a middle C, that sounds kind of low on the violin. If a double bass is playing a middle C, it sounds quite high for the double bass. So once I knew things like that, thanks to the book, then I would sit with these scores. So I would go to the music school, get a score of Mozart or Beethoven or Haydn or whatever, and just start looking at how they had spread music across various instruments. So I think the first thing was unlocking how high and low instruments could play and what the varying ranges meant for sound. And then I would sit and look at scores and say, all right, well, this person made the most of this passage by using a violin at on a very high part of their register, and it gave this effect. And I just kind of immersed myself in understanding music from the inside out, which I'll say now with the way the internet behaves, all of those scores are immediately available. There are plenty of websites that have PDFs of um, a Mozart symphony or a piano concerto or something like that, and it is that much easier to start the process of understanding music from the inside out.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when you go to school for audio, at least for me, they give, we look at it in frequencies, and they do something similar to that, in which, like, I have a chart that shows all of the frequencies that a certain instrument would mainly occupy. And it's sort of like throughout the spectrum of that in that way. So that's fascinating. Have you ever done anything like experimental, or did you go off on that path at some point where you're like, well, a violin is supposed to occupy this range, but let me see if I compose something to where it's like not right? Like, have you purposefully done something incorrect?
I haven't. No, I haven't. I have learned the hard way about a few things. Yeah, for instance, like in spelling a chord, let's take a C major chord. The distance between the C, the root of that chord, and maybe the fifth, and then the third, which is what would make it major. Um, I needed to fall on my face a few times, and that helped me figure out, oh, I shouldn't have spelled it that way. I shouldn't have given the violas the third. That's too low. I should have given them the fifth. But also, speaking of the fifth of a chord, in a recording, with some of the most brilliant string players on planet Earth, gave the fifth of a chord to the violins, and it was an open string, an open G. Well, then they can't affect it in any way. There's no sense of vibrato. It's just this very strident sound. But I didn't know. I mean, I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know how hard it would be to cover that up, and to sort of like um, make the kind of round out the edge of the sound. The sound just had an edge. So some of it is just trial and error. It's less being experimental for the sake of being experimental, and more experimenting, seeing what works, and when I realize it doesn't, saying, well, I won't ever do that again. That was terrible.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I never thought about that. That if you assign something, so essentially what you're saying is, somebody's playing the violin, but if you compose it to where they have the open string, they're not pressing on anything.
Right.
So they can't, bend it or move it or like that. And so that's going to affect the way that things sound as it
Yeah.
comes. Yeah, no, I never thought about that either. And in a sense, it's like, you don't physically have to know how to play each instrument, but you do eventually learn to have some sense of what's going to be your end result through trial and error of just composing and seeing how it goes.
Yeah. And I think one of the main bits of advice I would offer somebody that is perhaps trying to get into this is, if you put your music in front of people to hear it, that in and of itself is a huge gift, that people would sit down and agree to bring your little creation to life. But over and above that, if they're making notes on the page, ask them why. Ask them why they decided that their finger on the fretboard needed to be this way, or why they changed a bowing to be something, or a flute player, why they decided that instead of one breath, it needed to be two breaths, but they would sneak it in a certain place. It's all very interesting stuff. So while I don't know how to play the flute, I've never played the flute in my life, I've worked with some incredible flute players that at the end of a session, a rehearsal, worship service, whatever the case, I'll ask for their music that's been marked up, and I'll say, can you help me understand why you chose to do this? Because it worked better your way than it worked my way. And I think just being open to people who do specialize in various instruments, and their suggestions is crucial.
Yeah, I was wondering that too. Like, how often do those types of conversations occur? I mean, do you have like a constant back and forth feedback where you're writing music and then it's a collaboration and that you try it out on the people who are going to be playing it and say, like, okay, tell me what you think? Does that happen all the time?
Yeah, a little. There's a part of the answer that feels like, or it could sound like I was a pushy salesman. I really wasn't. I was not ever trying to sell people into helping me. But if players were interested, and it's very easy to tell if somebody's interested in talking with you. If players were interested, I just tried to maximize that fully, and would say, I'll buy you lunch if you'll play through this passage for me just to help me understand. Um, I, I didn't do that so much in college, but I also didn't know that I wanted to write for instruments in college. I feel like I wrote more for voice, piano, and I had access to all of that. I was writing for choirs, I was writing for pianists. But in hindsight, if I could go back and ask people that I was classmates with that did play, the oboe or the English horn or whatever, I would put stuff in front of them and just say, "Tell me how your instrument functions. Tell me why this sounds the way it does. Tell me why you don't like that starting note, but you like the second note. And what would you suggest I do? Instead of waiting until I was hounding professionals, as a 25-year-old, trying to chase them down. It would have been really handy to go to my classmates. But again, there's no wrong way to do it. Just, get in front of people.
So, what is your degree actually? What do they call it? What's the name of it?
Sacred music with an emphasis in choral conducting.
Okay, so that is a lot of music theory.
It is. Uh, it is a hefty amount of music theory. It was a lot of understanding how sacred music evolved, how it developed, how it evolved, why, certain texts mattered, or I don't know why certain composers were considered avant-garde within the sacred music sphere, but sacred music being largely Christian or Jewish in heritage. So it's a fairly pigeonholed, it leaves out a huge swath of what people would say is sacred to them, perhaps, but it encompassed a great deal of music history because so much music early on was written for the church. And that was kind of a music hub, if you will, in Western life. So a lot of music history, a lot of studying sacred texts and composers that brought those sacred texts into the music sphere.
And I know that you have traveled all around the world with the choir also performing. And the performance part, that aspect, did that really, well, I mean, I'm sure it would offer like a lot of enjoyment too, but did it help understand the composition in a
Yeah,
way?
for sure. I mean, I think anybody that sings in a choir begins to understand how music works from the inside out. In the same way that I was talking about discovering instrumental music with these big full scores because they were full orchestra. When you're sitting down with a piece of choir music, you're looking at what the sopranos, the altos, the tenors, and basses are all doing at once. And that differs from a full score because if you're in an orchestra and you're an oboe player, you have no idea what the French horns are playing. That music is not in your music. All you know is you have three measures of rest and you're to come in and play thing X. So the cool part about singing with choir was getting to see what everybody was doing at all times. Are they handing me something? Is an alto line handing me a tenor something that I'm supposed to do something with? Is that how the melody continues? Like it gets too low for the altos, but it hands off to the tenors, and all of a sudden we're responsible for picking right up on that. Am I in a more sort of a background state in an unimportant role, compared to the melody, but kind of an undergirding, like what rebar is in the construction of a road or a sidewalk. Am I like integral to the foundation of it, or am I the shining thing that stands on top? So I learned a ton from singing with choirs and seeing all of the music that was being made on the page.
Well, and so these days, I know your new album just came out a couple of weeks ago. I Carry Your Heart.
Mm-hmm.
That's yes. Yeah. And is every song, because I know you're doing a combination of things now with choir and orchestra instruments. Is that what's going on throughout the whole album, or does it switch off?
Almost. So the opening track, "I Carry Your Heart," is with string quintet, which is a very intimate sound. One violin, one violin, two, viola, cello, and bass, and harp, which is sort of the motor that keeps everything going, and then choir on top of that. It's an E. E. Cummings poem, beautiful poem, something that I think I read in high school and just fell in love with. But then the second track is a text I found called Effortlessly, which is from the 12th century. And it's unaccompanied, so it's just voices, a cappella. And then the third track begins this requiem, 6 movements of a requiem, which is about 30 to 35 minutes. And that's with a pretty decent sized orchestra. So we've gone from 5 string players and harp to no instruments at all, just voice, to 4 first violins, 4 second violins, 4 violas, 4 cellos, 2 basses, and a partridge in a pear tree. It sort of grows and grows and grows. So some of them have brass, some of them do not, some of them have woodwinds, some of them do not. Each track is a little bit different.
It's so fascinating to me how a person could even write for that many instruments. Just how there could be that many sort of parts that are floating around in your mind. I mean, is there a preferred, do you have like a group of instruments that you prefer writing for? Like, out of like just sheer enjoyment, do you like writing choir better, or a certain like?
I feel like choir is my native sound, like it's what I grew up around. And it's probably what has brought me the most enjoyment in music making over my lifetime. I love writing for the cello. I love writing for the French horn. I think I probably, less than having preferred pairings, I think I have instruments that I turn to more often than not. I don't find myself writing a ton of clarinet music or bassoon music. That's not to say I don't enjoy what those instruments bring to the table, but if somebody said, in the next 10 days, we need you to churn out a piece for choir and it needs to involve one other instrument, it could be anything you want, I'd probably say, all right, it'll be choir and cello, because I just so enjoy writing for the cello.
Yeah, I mean, that's my next thought when you're just saying that, is the business aspect of it. So you have your position at work, and people come to you and request that you write certain things. Is that, I mean, how exactly, because I know that you're hooked up with this project now for your album. Who are you involved with? What are the groups? I mean, people know who you are. What are they requesting for? Like, how does the partnerships work?
So I have a full-time church job, and they don't request much at all when it comes to writing music, but they know I can. So sometimes it's been the case where they've said, hey, we've got this need, would you fill it? That's how Bach paid his bills. He was a church musician. He had 2 church jobs. He wrote a ton on the side, but he would fill needs for these church services. So I very proudly have my church job and work with a choir, and I love what I do. In the writing world, I have a manager that helps keep track of my schedule. She's sending out my music and recordings to different choirs and orchestras around the world. And if they're interested in, commissioning something, then they'll get in touch with her. She'll say, all right, tell me a little bit about the project. Is it supposed to be 10 minutes long? Is it supposed to be 4 minutes long? Is it supposed to be 45 minutes long? And then based on their response and affiliating needs, like that it's going to take a year and a half before they can perform it, or they need it in 6 months but they need to be able to rehearse it for 3 months, or they have a budget of $12, whatever the case, then she begins to kind of decide whether or not that's something that we can take on or not. So I rely very heavily on my manager to sort of keep me between the ditches. But when people reach out to commission something, they are oftentimes celebrating an anniversary. A choir has been around 150 years and they want to commemorate that with a new work, or a school is celebrating its 200th anniversary, or a new building is being opened and they want a new work written specifically for the ribbon cutting or whatever. And those things can be just choir, they can be choir and other instruments. Sometimes people come to the table with texts in mind and they'll say, we are deciding between these two poems or these two, sacred texts or whatever. And there may be a little bit of back and forth, but ultimately, if what they've decided is there's this, Christina Rossetti poem that they just absolutely must use, then I can either get on board and do that, or I can say, I'm sorry, I can't. I'd love to, but I can't. So it can be almost anything.
Okay, and for this album, for I Carry Your Heart, and what was the genesis of this project? Because it's released under you as your name, Taylor Scott Davis, but you have all these performers. I mean, did you have the intention of going out to, make a Taylor Scott Davis album? Or did somebody come to you first and say, we'd like the choir group that's in London? How do you pronounce that? Is it
So
Voces
I should have said when you asked what my positions were. I am, as of about 6 months ago, the composer in residence for Voces 8. They are one of the, if not the most famous choir in the world. They travel all over, hundreds of dates on the calendar every year. They record, they've um, provided music for film score. They are a behemoth. There are 8 voices, 2 sopranos, 2 altos, 2 tenors, 2 basses, but they are the best of the best. And so when I became composer in residence for them, I guess just prior to that, I had written for them quite a bit. And so the question came up: we're turning 20. You're about to be composer in residence. Would you like to consider doing something as a part of this? And the answer, of course, was yes. So I Carry Your Heart was not written for them. It was written for another group that commissioned me. The piece, I Carry Your Heart, but it was great fun to put it in front of them because they're just extraordinary at what they do. Effortlessly, the second track on the album was written for them a few years ago. And so that was me writing specifically for those voices. And it's fun that now it's out on the album with just their voices. And then the Requiem that they asked me to write is this 35 minute work and involves, as I said, a fairly good size orchestra, definitely not a chamber orchestra. And the choir went from the 8 of them to like 24. So they brought in a bunch of their scholar singers from all over the UK, some in other parts of Europe. And we recorded it last June. So Voces 8 can be just the 8 of them, or it can be them plus other people in their stable, because they are big into education outreach and sort of constantly training new voices, new young professionals.
Yeah, and I feel, sort of admittedly ignorant, like not knowing as much about them prior to this. But for somebody out there who doesn't know about them, I mean, when I took a look at them, I saw like they were involved a lot in education, but they're sort of like dressed in plain clothes. Like, just is that kind of a way to go about like modernization? Or because I mean, traditionally, when you see a choir, it's going to be the very formal, like church type setting where everybody has the robes and everything. I mean, are we moving, more in the direction of, because they're obviously like very incredibly talented. I mean,
Yeah.
what would you say about, is there a modernization piece that people are trying to be more down to earth, do you think?
Well, they I do think they do an exceptional job of making music available to the masses. And I think part of that is the way they look. If they're giving a concert, in December, I was with them in Washington, D.C., because they premiered a new Christmas carol that I wrote. And that was at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. They were in tuxes and nice dresses for that,
Hmm.
or suits and nice dresses. But then, as you say, they'll often be in these recordings, these videos that they put together, and they're just in street clothes. And I think both belong. I think the acknowledging the venue, the reverence of the venue, the history of the venue requires you to perhaps gussy up. But then there's nothing wrong with them singing in jeans and polo shirt, because in some ways they're just showing you what they do at the office. So it's sort of more like a casual setting. Um, that's them at their cubicle, more or less, when they're making those videos. So I think it's both and. I think they're just really good at saying this style belongs in this space, and so therefore we're going to look this way. And because we're not beholden to that in this video, we're going to look how we want to look.
Yeah, I really love that because it shows, a certain versatility in the way that things are being presented these days. I mean, you want to look proper for the venue that you're in, but I really love how these days, people also can have these smaller ensembles in places that you wouldn't have imagined before. Like, for example, I've seen like the string quartet will be playing here where I live whenever you can go just have a coffee and watch them, at the coffee shop or a little venue they have there. Or I've been to like another performance that they'll have at a vineyard, and so I really love how, like, as you say, bringing it down to the masses, that people are stepping out of the box and exploring different spaces in that way.
Yeah,
I mean,
and their music is representative of that gambit. They sing music that is from 500 years ago. It's a gorgeous Renaissance piece of music for double choir, maybe. And then they'll turn around and they'll sing an arrangement of Route 66, and they are incredible at both. But by being incredible at both, I think they've done a really good job of representing the people that listen to their music. Yeah, it's some significant patrons that go to these concerts, and also it's people that look like you and me, and aren't maybe wearing a tux and a gown to the local symphony hall, because it's a Thursday night and they're just out. So I think they look the part. I think they sound the part as well, which is really a good thing.
if somebody was going to, for example, stream your album, I mean, what kind of vibe are we getting? Because I feel like anybody could listen to this type of music and specifically your album, like just to be, like chill at home in the background, you're relaxing. Like what can you say about the vibe?
Well, I think if you were to go to a Voces 8 concert, like again, let's take the one in December. They do a brilliant job of explaining each piece before it happens, or maybe if they're going to do a set, they'll do a set of two or three pieces, and they'll specifically say, "Here's why we're treating this as a set." And if you even feel like applauding, if you could just wait until after this second or third piece. But the little micro education moments that they give are humorous and relatable. It's taking music that's often 300 or 400 years old and contextualizing it for people. So they do an excellent job of making it something that's digestible for just regular people. You don't have to be a doctoral student in music history from 1700 to 1704, for instance. So there's that. As far as listening to the "I Carry Your Heart" album, um, I don't think you necessarily need um, to understand the sacred texts that I've set. I don't think you need to understand poetry to appreciate the E. Cummings poem, "I Carry Your Heart." I think it's I think understanding the rise and the fall of it is important, and that's just it, to distill it down. It's love and loss. Love in the form of the E. Cummings poem, which was truly just about one human loving another human. Love in the second track, "Effortlessly," is about a creator loving humanity. And then track 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, those are all from this requiem, and which is about loss. And we can all understand love and loss. And then the recovery after the requiem. There are these 3 sacred texts, and again, it's like that's probably what peace sounds like. That's what acceptance sounds like. That's what relinquishing control sounds like. Those last 3 tracks. So if sacred texts, if poetry is your thing, then great, listen to it with that ear. But if not, it's an album that's representative of some very human qualities in loving and losing.
Yeah, no, I love that, it's really exploring. I mean, as all music does, I feel like there's a universality, to, if that's a word, universality to it. I mean, everybody as a human goes through these life experiences, certain sets of emotions, and you don't have to be confined to, maybe the genre that you're used to. Like, go out there and be curious about things, and you can find a lot of these commonalities, as you go through the music. And I like how you're able to explore that.
I think with all art, whether that's a piece of sculpture or piece of music, um, it hits you different at different times. If you've just um, learned to appreciate visual art, it's going to hit you differently than if you're in 5th grade and exploring a museum for the first time. If you're listening to a love song and you've just broken up with somebody, it's going to hit you different than if you're listening to a love song and you're celebrating your 50th anniversary. But every time we listen to it, we're these different humans, and we're coming at it from a different angle. And the loss thing might hurt really badly one time, and then you listen to it again and you think, yeah, I'm glad I pushed through that. This strikes me in a different way.
I really love that you're saying that and pointing that out, because, as art, I mean, we really are, in a sense, as a creator of the art. Maybe you are feeling something in a moment, or you're creating it for a purpose. And then, once you release that art out onto the world, it really belongs to the world and the interpreter as they're listening to it. And as you listen to something, you really are ascribing your own experiences onto, what is either coming out of your speaker or you're experiencing in person. And so, I mean, I like that, whatever you have created for your art, not only are you adding the other people as collaborators into your composition, so then they continue to change it. And then when you perform it to your audience, each audience member, can have their own unique experience of your art as they see it.
I'm often talking about people, performers or conductors, putting their fingerprints on my music, and I to me that's just kind of the best way to for me to think about it. It it's fun when people are saying we value this enough to do it, and then when they do it, they're also saying, and here's how we interpret it. I just think that's very cool. And then it doesn't have to exist that way again. In fact, in all likelihood, it won't exist that way again.
In each live performance. And you're, as an engineer, thinking about the different spaces and the different acoustics and the way that things are, or as you say, if there's different performers and they're adding, their own take on it each time. I mean, yeah, it's going to continue. And as we go through life, anytime that we listen to it, we're going to experience it in a different way. And so, I mean, that's a really beautiful thing to think about.
And there's also just an energy that is present in a room that, you could give back-to-back performances. One of them is at 2 o'clock and one of them is at, say, 5 o'clock. The audience is being different, will bring a different energy, and that energy changes the perception of what's happening. So it's always evolving. Every aspect of art is evolving. The human element of what we do, whether that's a room full of listeners or a stage full of performers, it's just constantly evolving.
Okay, before we listen to some of I Carry Your Heart, because I would like to, if you want to, can we talk about the very interesting topic of synesthesia? Can you explain to everyone what synesthesia is and how you experience that?
So I'm no scientist, and I'm sure I'm missing a load of important details. But essentially, I I participate in music making and see color and texture as I do, and each key has a different color and or texture. So the key of D flat is kind of a charcoal gray black, but it's matte black. And then the key of F sharp major is also black, but it's a glossy black. And the thing about synesthesia is that's just how my body processes those two keys. And you could line up 50 people with synesthesia and they probably wouldn't agree on every nook and cranny. If they agree on a color, but they experience a texture, like what are the odds that those things line up? So I lived through my early 20s thinking that everybody saw color and texture. And one day I just started talking about it, and people in college were like, what in the hell are you talking about? And I was like, what do you mean? What am I talking about? What are you talking about? And lo and behold, um, I, I was the weirdo, you know? I didn't realize that entire time that that was my little superpower. So I love it. It's sometimes I wish I could turn it off and I could just participate in music making without that. So if I'm not staring at a score, I have a really good chance at that. But again, that's just how my body processes synesthesia. And like I know John Mayer has synesthesia, and how he interprets his music making is going to be completely different from mine. He's not right. He's not wrong. I'm not right. I'm not wrong. It's all very individualized.
So, I mean, in short, it's like a crossover of the senses,
Mm-hmm.
and that you're either, you know, seeing sounds or hearing colors. Are these things that you're physically seeing in front of your eyes when you write or when you listen? How does it present?
It's when I'm writing, when I'm sitting at the piano, when I'm singing, like if I'm in front of a score of music, if there's sheet music in front of me. If there's not, I can sort of turn it off and space out. But if there's music in front of me and I know what the key is, game over. It's going to be colors and textures. I was on a date one time, and this girl asked me about it, and we were driving down the freeway, and she said, "Holy crap! Like, are you about to wreck the car?" And I said, "No, no, no. It's not like a curtain. I don't become blind because there's just blue in front of me. I can't really describe it. It's just the presence of color. That's as good as I can describe it. But I it can It can be wavy, it can be solid. Um, yeah, it's hard to. It's such a weird thing to try to explain.
But so does it work the other way around for you too? Like whenever, if you were looking at a canvas and you had, the paints with all the different colors on them, are you going to be able to hear a certain set of sounds coming off of each thing that you're looking at?
Yeah, like there's a painting here in my studio, and it's largely blue, or it's shades of blue. That to me is the key of F. So that's just sort of the F painting that I have hanging here. Um, I don't look at it and see a scale or hear melodies, but if I'm wearing my music making hat, um, it's that's in the key of F.
It's sort of like humming in a way.
Yeah, I would like if I sat and stared at that painting and then tried to write in the key of G, I think my body would sort of glitch out. I think whether or not I knew it, I think my body would fight against making music in another color while I was staring at the key of what I associate with F.
Do you have certain keys or colors that you prefer because they feel more comfortable to you?
I love the key of D flat. Um, it just feels warm and rich. It sits nicely into the fingers. But like oftentimes I'll start writing the key of C, which is white, just like a blank canvas. And then I might move that to another key, but it's because I started with white that allowed me to say, you know what, I feel like this would be really good in yellow. I think this would be really good in the key of D. And I'll move it. Maybe sometimes I move it because of a range issue. We were talking about that earlier, where past a certain point, the violin just doesn't sound. So I might need to move a melody up a little bit so that the violin could continue to play it. But I might also move it into a key so that I'm making music in a color that I think sounds like what I'm trying to create.
One thing, I saw a little video that you did, and I remember you saying that about the key of C being white. And I thought that was so interesting because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the key of C doesn't have any sharps or flats.
That's right.
So it's going to be the fact that it was white. I don't, there was some sort of connection about that where like you've got all the colors of the spectrum within white and you almost have no, it just seemed like that was fitting for
Yeah.
that key.
Yeah. And I would be curious if somebody else with synesthesia would say, no, the key of Y or the key of C is green. I don't know. I didn't. I don't think I selected white. I think white was selected for me. But as you say, there are. If you're playing a C scale, um, you don't touch any of the black keys. You're only playing on the white keys. So yeah, in some ways, it's like, duh. Of course, that's white. It should be. Um,
Yeah.
but I can't then explain why red in the key of A is really bright, and red is the key of G, but it's a little bit dull compared to A. So A is like fire engine red, and G is more like, I don't know, a red you might find on like crimson maybe, like the University of Alabama, that shade of red. Um, if I were to sit and think about it, I'm sure like the brightness of three sharps versus one sharp might have something to do with it, but I've not ever sat and delved into that. I just think of it as very, very red and subtly red.
The focused intention. And I think you just mentioned that too. Like, in a sense, you're focusing on something and you can have these experiences, but then you also have the ability to sort of shut your brain off if you need to dissociate from it, for lack of a better word. So you're able to like keep it in a lane if you need it, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, that's really interesting because I have a sort of side topic, clairaudient sort of thing, but it is very similar to me like that in that like I can focus my intention on it and experience it. But if I need to not experience that, that's just not part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no rhyme or reason for that. And again, like person X might completely disagree with me and say, no, I can't turn it off by, just not looking at a score or whatever. I can't walk away from it. And their experience is not right or wrong. It just is their experience.
Has there ever been a moment where having synesthesia has been useful to you in some manner? Like, have you used it for a purpose in writing? Has it come artistically?
Only in, as I said, making music sound like what I see or look how I want it to. But that's such a personal thing. Like me writing in the key of F because a passage sounds blue does not mean that the audience is ever going to hear it or the singer will ever hear it and experience anything blue. So it might scratch an itch for me, but in general, I've not found a way to convey that in any kind of meaningful way. Am I glad I have it? Yeah, I think it's cool. Maybe I'm underutilizing it. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I don't know. I'm glad I have it though, and I'm also glad I can generally talk myself into walking away from thinking in those terms if I just put the music down.
Yeah, that would be difficult if it was on all the time and you would never be able to turn it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the one experiment that I wanted to do, although, if somebody's got to step up and be the test subject, like as an engineer, I wanted to go, play sine waves, like pure tones at each frequency, and then say, what color are you experiencing now? What does this sound like? What does this sound like? And go through the entire range of human hearing and have the colors mapped out so that you could see the spectrum for that person in their experience, and then see exactly how that lines up, and then try to do some sort of thing the other way around where you could combine the different colors and see, like, if you look at this, does it make that chord? Like, I just
Mhm.
had so many ideas on how those experiments could be put to the test. That would be so cool.
Yeah. No, that's a cool idea. And again, it would be completely individualized. You if you did that 5 times, you'd have 5 completely different color palettes sitting in front of you.
Or like if you take a certain piece, I mean, Mozart would be probably too complicated, but if you took like a really simple piece of music and then like assigned, each tone in the piece to a certain color, what exactly, like video wise, what exactly would that create as its own piece of art to go along with it?
Yeah.
Dude. I'm like, okay, well, that's, maybe we can try to convince you to do this crazy
Yeah.
experiment at some other time.
Yeah. I
But
dig it.
who knows? All right. Okay. You want to try to listen to this?
Yeah, sure. What are we going to listen to?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the album that was just released, I Carry Your Heart. So everybody pull up this title track. You can search for it on YouTube, I Carry Your Heart by Taylor Scott Davis. This piece is a combination of a small vocal ensemble. It looks like, when I was looking at it, 12 men, 12 women, 3 violins, is that 2 cellos?
It's 2 violins, a viola, which just looks like uh, a violin with a little holiday weight on it, and then cello and double bass.
Double bass. That's
Yeah.
what that thing is called. Yeah, that's cool. And the harp. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So, as a sound tech, what I was thinking is you've got something to occupy the lower range frequencies that have like the longer, more sustained notes. And then you've got the mid range and the high with the violins, and then the harp is like sitting on top, plucking through the arpeggios and the chord progressions. Is that the way that you look at song construction? Like, did you do that purposefully?
Um, I chose a string quintet because I liked the intimacy of sound. You know, one in basically what I'm saying is one instrument, as opposed to a section, um, is being represented from the strings. So it would be like if we took one soprano, one alto, one tenor, one bass. That's essentially what a string quartet is: one soprano, one alto, one tenor, one bass. Um, a string quintet adds a double bass, which gives you an extra layer down, an extra octave down from the cello, and the it creates this sense of warmth, um, with just one player on each part, as opposed to a section. And it's not that one is better than the other, but it creates a sense of warmth and a sense of intimacy. It's, you know, it's almost like these people have shown up just to play for you, as opposed to a full section, which could, you know, potentially be like 30 plus people if we were to do a full section of violins, a full section of violas, cellos, and basses. Then the harp is, you know, that an easy substitute for the harp would be a piano, or like if a guitarist had a classical, like a nylon string guitar, just kind of churning these rhythms out, so it allows the voices and the strings to just sort of create these long held phrases, and those notes on their own would feel really elongated and like they were free of time and beats, if it weren't for the fact that the harp is underneath saying, nope, we're staying at this tempo, and we're sort of like just churning through each measure. So everybody does play their own part, for sure.
Which instrument did you start with when you were writing this, or how did it come to you? Do the longer droning notes come to you as more like a chord progression, or how do you even begin thinking about this?
I started with harp and voice. And so the opening tenor line, although with Voces 8 and the Voces 8 Foundation choir, the all the tenors and basses are singing. So it's both sections as opposed to just the tenors. And what happens then is the basses, because they're singing at the very, very top end of what's possible, they add this color, this texture to the sound that the tenors are, otherwise that's like their home field advantage up there. So it creates this very buttery, velvety sound. So I started with the tenor line, that opening vocal line, and harp, and then after I got the choir parts done, I went back and added the string parts.
So you purposefully had the bass singers, the men, sing in a higher register up almost where the tenors would be, in order to create the sound of that, because it wouldn't be as natural for them, but they sort of have like a bigger like resonance to that. That's
Yeah,
that's
that's a
fascinating.
great way to think about it. So the tenors up there can, because that's just home base, that can sound a little bit edgier. They can really cut through sound up there. And as the basses rise up and join the tenors, it sort of rounds out the sound a little bit. So it's nothing that the tenors could do authentically on their own. They really need the help of the basses to do that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I'm going to look at my notes about the song, because there were certain parts that I wanted to highlight. The harp sort of comes in beautifully solo, introducing us to what the piece is going to be. And then the cello comes in and brings in that melody, and the men come in vocally to reinforce it. And the cello and the violins come back in together. And then they pretty much, yes, this is the part. They pretty much play the same line for a minute. And then right there at about 134 or 135, the violin line deviates from the cello and plays a similar line at an interval above it in higher notes. And I'm telling you, That is when I'm like, I'm trying not to.
That's the
That
good
is
stuff.
when I start to tear up. And every time I can't even listen to it right now because every time I listen to it, it's like it pulls at your heartstrings. Like, did you do that on purpose? That's my question.
Well, I wasn't gunning for your heartstrings personally, but there is, I think part of what you're experiencing right there is, um, for that first minute, the cello and the singers and the harp are making sound. Obviously, in watching the video, you can see the other players. You know they're going to come in at some point, but what's it going to be like when the viola comes in and they start to have this little duet almost, where it's like they're moving together. Moving from one voice to two is quite impactful. And if I had just started with two voices, I don't think you would have felt that same way. It's like it's unfurling in front of you in a way that feels emotional. And if you start there, how do you get bigger? So
Mm.
one of the keys was starting small and giving the singers and the string players some room to stretch out.
Yeah, no, it's so gorgeous. I mean, it really, I like the way you described that. There was another part at about 3:07. There's a switch there that was interesting, and I was wondering, is that the relative minor of the key that this is in?
Ooh, let me pull that up.
It was sort of an unexpected shift in the song, but I wrote I really like it because it gives the piece more dimension and something to resolve back to. Because I was thinking as I was listening to that, you didn't have to do that.
Hmm.
Like in your writing, you could have, or one didn't have to do that. They could have kept it just very simple and it wouldn't have had the dimension that you gave it.
So at around the 3 minute mark, I start to cycle through other keys, but I only stay on them for a couple of measures each. And there's this expanse that's happening. The what starts as just the tenors and basses becomes the tenors, or the basses, the tenors, and the altos, and then the basses, tenors, altos, and sopranos. So it keeps growing and growing and growing, and the sound just keeps evolving up. So it's not the relative minor. It's just sort of pivoting. So here's a good way to think about it. If you're in the key of C, again, if we're just on our white canvas, we have C, E, and G making up a C major chord. If you pivot using the G, you could play a G major chord, you could play an E flat major chord, and then that G becomes the third instead of the fifth. So I do a lot of experimenting when I've when I've gone through a verse or maybe two verses, and I've really established, okay, we're in the key of E. Then it's time to do something different. And doing something different, to me, is not just like changing keys without rhyme or reason. It's taking a note and saying, all right, this is no longer the fifth, it's now the root. Oh, this is no longer the root, it's now the third. And I start to cycle through different keys in that spot. That's what you're talking about.
What comes to mind as you're saying that is jazz. And so what I'm, I guess I've always wondered that too. Is that what jazz musicians are doing? Are they taking, different parts of a certain chord and then they're expanding on it in different ways from there? And because sometimes when you listen to jazz, it goes some places and you're just like, how is that going to ever get back to anywhere?
Yeah.
And I've always wondered, because I mean, I'm certainly not a jazz musician. There's some rhyme or reason and logic to what is being done, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think jazz musicians in their quest to take a melody and kind of turn it on its head and improvise are pretty adept at saying, all right, we're going to pivot from this being the third of the chord to this being the fifth of the next key, or whatever. I i suppose there's a part of it that's a little bit self-indulgent. It's like, what would I like to hear next? So it's not math at that point or science at that point. It's like, what makes me feel good moving forward? And maybe I intend to get back to the original key. Maybe I use that moment to cycle through a few keys, and now all of a sudden we've gone from E major to G major. I don't know, just as a total haphazard example. But in creating that moment that you're referencing at the 3 minute mark, I think I knew I wanted to do something different. I knew that I wanted to keep my eye on to me, the apex of the poem, and therefore the apex of my piece needed to be the tree of life. And what I wanted is for the singers and the instrumentalists to sort of create roots that went down and a canopy that went up. And if it sounds like that to you, then I've done my job. And if you think I'm crazy, that's also completely fine.
No, I love that you're saying, because you are writing the music. Conform is like not the right word that I'm looking for, but you wanted an association musically to the lyrics, the poem that we're going to have it be with. I mean, how does it always happen like that? Or do you have music first and then you're finding the particular poem or lyrics that go with it? Or do you ever write lyrics yourself?
I don't write texts. I could. I love writing poetry just sort of on my own, but not for any general purpose other than it feels like a creative outlet, a calm creative outlet. But to answer your first question, sometimes I would say generally it's the text that is creating um, guidelines for me. The text is creating melodies, it's creating chords, it's giving me direction. And that was definitely the case with I Carry Your Heart. But I did a project a few years ago with Boches 8. And as I was looking at this poem, I was kind of struggling with how to make it sound like those words needed to sound. And I reached back in my little database that just lives in my head and remembered that I had created this melody in college and I didn't know what to do with it. But I hung on to it, and I'm glad I did. I didn't just say, you know what, it's just never going to happen. I filed it away, and it became useful like 25 years later. And I gave it to the cellos, the tenors, and the basses, and it fit perfectly. So sometimes there are these moments where I've created something, I've not assigned it to anything. It's just a random series of notes, and I'll look at a text and think, oh, it's presented itself this opportunity, and I go for it. But I would say it's more like, 4/5 text driven, 1/5 random wild hair idea, and sort of reverse engineering.
What I was thinking of when you're just saying that, what it reminds me of is Eminem,
Hmm.
the rapper
Yeah, yeah,
Eminem. Yeah, because he's known for just constantly writing things down and having these ideas come, and then maybe it doesn't fit here, but it's going to fit 5 years later or something, and
yeah.
you just never know when that inspiration is going to hit. I mean, does that happen to you all the time? Or are you just going through life and you're hearing little snippets or things in dreams, and then you write it down and you never know when something is going to come together?
There's a lot of you know um the postmodern version of scraps of paper lying around is my cell phone has a voice recorder on it, and in the middle of the night I might wake up and have an idea and I sing into it, and the next day it may make a lot of sense, or the next day it might just be gibberish and I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with that. But the mature musician in me now will say, don't get rid of it, that might be something. And the 20-year-old version of me would have said, well, that seemed like a good idea, you don't know what to do with it now, so just ditch it. I can't tell you how much music I threw away thinking it was invaluable, um, 25 years ago. But now I not in a hoarder sort of way, but I try to keep everything around in case it's useful somewhere else, you know. Just because it's on the cutting room floor doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. So that that has become um, my mantra. Just hang on to stuff.
So, I mean, I guess that brings me to a good topic of, I went through a period in my life of extreme depression where I stopped playing music completely. And as you said, the music that you've left behind, you're kind of regretting it because you realized there were so many good things. I spent a lot of years turning um, the music off because I didn't want to play anymore and I didn't want that to be a part of my life. I mean, has there ever been a point in your life where you've struggled with your life path as a composer, doing music at all, or questioning, is this for me? And what could you say to people if they're going through something like that?
It's good to hear that you and I have had a similar experience, and I think for a lot of artists who find it really difficult to separate their art from their person, those things are inextricably linked. It can feel like a crisis, because it's not just like, oh, I don't pick up my ball and glove anymore. It's like this huge chunk of who I thought I was doesn't seem to be around right now. I don't have access to that person. So I think it was probably 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. So a little more than a decade ago. I really struggled and reached out to a few musician friends that are a few years older than me and said, hey, have you ever gone through this? And they said yes. And I felt less crazy because of that and learned to call it my listening season instead of thinking, oh, I'm not a creative force right now. I sort of recontextualized it so that it felt positive. You know, I could listen to stuff, or I could just be receptive to stuff. If I was watching a movie, I could be receptive to the score, without that resulting in me sitting down and writing something new. And it scared me to death. And also, after about a year, I started writing again and I had new ideas. And I felt like that was a really crucial part of me becoming the middle aged musician. Is like when a locust sheds its skin, you know, like I was able to leave a bit of who I was behind and stand on the year of listening, the year of asking questions. And I think I'm better off for it. So I would say, you know, nobody's ever reached the summit of a mountain if they've stopped climbing. So just keep climbing. And it may take different forms, different shapes. The end result may be that instead of a performer, you're an engineer, or maybe instead of being an engineer, you're a producer. Instead of a producer, you're working in the record label office, looking for new artists. It can evolve, but being open to it evolving by continuing to pursue is a big deal, and you're not crazy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good note to end on too, is that, things can come back. Like even if you've lost it for a while, or they can take different forms. I mean, maybe, things continue to evolve and you return to the thing that you're passionate about and the thing that you love in a completely different capacity. And that's okay. It doesn't have you don't have to lose it completely. Because I know, just personally lately, I'm trying to play guitar and I'm having trouble with my elbow. And it's like, there's things that come up, like whether it be a mental issue or a physical limitation, or maybe, outside circumstances like you're not getting the jobs that you want, or, you're having an existential crisis of
Yeah.
identity. Like you never know. But I think it's important to mention too, people focus a lot on the outcome in terms of finances. and they think that that is what's going to give them validity and self-worth. And there's something to be said, I think you said it a little bit ago, about sometimes you want to create just because you want to create.
Yeah, that's right. You don't have to have something to sell at the end, and that's completely okay. It does not make you less of an artist. It doesn't make your creation less than somebody else's creation. And I think being open to what the universe does with your time and talent is a real key part of being an artist. There's no sense in playing the game of comparison. There's no sense in saying, well, my creation doesn't stand on its own because it doesn't provide me a six-figure income. Does your creation feel like you were creating because the universe called you to create? You are fulfilling your obligation. You are a vessel for art. And that by itself truly is enough.
On that note, thank you so much, Taylor Scott Davis. The album, it's out. Is it streaming? Where could people find it? Can they go see you? Can they see you live? Like, what is happening?
I just finished a big festival in the UK. I'll be at a festival at Carnegie Hall in June, where I'll be conducting. I'll be at a festival in Albuquerque in July, another one in Portland. I think all of these things are probably on my website, but I couldn't tell you exactly. But find me on social media and keep up. It's fun to answer questions and bounce ideas back and forth. And when there's something new to show, that's generally the first place to go. But yeah, you can stream the music. You can find it on YouTube. All the cool things.
I Carry Your Heart, just released, out now.
2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
Thanks, Kate.